Unlike other traditional hypercarry damage dealers, Acheron is best in slot no matter the elemental matchup she finds herself in. What happens when you make the best already damage dealer even better? The competition becomes a lot less of a competition. This situation sort of reminds me of Jinsei post-release of Sheje. So instead of giving a historical analysis on Acheron, we're just going to have a yap session instead. I want to let you all know that I do stream daily on Twitch, twitch.tv/Toshio. The link will be in the description. I stream Genshin, Starro, and Wuthering Waves as of right now. We'll see what the future may hold. I am definitely looking at Madoka Magica, Magia, etc. I had to say like 10 times. Anyways, this video is sponsored by Lootbar. This video is sponsored by Lootbar. I was able to save on Stellar Jades with the cheaper prices they have compared to the typical in-game top-up version. The process is very safe and simple as it takes cheapest conversion currency rate and then presents to you many discounted prices, which you can then use with various coupons to save on an even more amount of Stellar Jades. The transaction is smooth and simple. Enter your UID in the top right corner. Once you choose your preferred method of payment, you will within a matter of moments receive your purchase on Neric shards, which you can then convert to Stellar Jades. One thing I like about Lootbar is that you get the first time top up bonus for your Stellar Jades, which is a massive help when it comes to making the videos, because that means more pools for the rate up character. Check out the link in the description to save on your Stellar Jade purchases, and thanks again to Lootbar for sponsoring this video. Post-release of Acheron, every single damage dealer was to see a usage decrease. I mean, for one, you have a character that is able to quite fundamentally change the way you play the game. Considering that you ignore the elemental weakness of the enemy, which comes into play with Acheron, this would prove to be valuable when the typing of the endgame content is to match whatever element is of the current rate up character. So if we take Acheron and put her in an ideal scenario, such as lightning weak enemies, she becomes best in slot because of the extra damage she can dish out via elemental skill. If we take Acheron out of her ideal scenario, she sees slightly less overall damage, sure, but she is still able to stand toe-to-toe with characters that are in their ideal scenarios. If we are to place both Acheron and other damage dealer in a scenario that neither would be ideal in, then Acheron would just be still as viable. The easiest way to circumvent these things is getting characters that allow you to bypass the elemental weakness with giving resistance penetration to the team in the form of ultimate or even eidolons. This is horizontal investment. Then we can also argue the vertical investment to Acheron via eidolons to yield good results as well, because then her overall damage then becomes a lot higher, which puts her above any other damage dealer even higher. I say this now as I know a lot of you are waiting for the inevitable rerun because of this. So have it so bad? Post Acheron also signaled a level of damage ceiling that hasn't been reached from a free-to-play based level. This in turn makes it a lot harder to recommend pre-Acheron damage dealers, or this in short is known as damage creep. So if you were to play with a damage dealer that released pre-Acheron, you would need a certain investment level stat-wise for that character to compete with an Acheron with lower investment. If you were to give that same amount of investment to Acheron, then she would of course give exponentially better results, because she is a hypercarry damage dealer after all. It's like the old days in Genshin Impact where permanently farming Emblem Severed Fates wasn't all too bad, and still arguably isn't so to this day. So why is any of this important? I wanted to give a detailed explanation of the damage creep we've reached post Acheron, and why it's a lot harder to recommend previously released damage dealers to new and returning players. But I do want to save this very same topic for another day. It's very important to keep in mind that we've been constantly receiving characters that have given Acheron the tools she needed to ensure she consistently keeps her damage uptime as much as possible, whether that's directly or indirectly. We've received Gallagher post release of Acheron, and he's able to put a debuff into the enemy that makes said enemy take more damage, which in turn gives Acheron not only a debuff to increase her damage uptime, but also increase that overall final damage when said enemy is taking more damage. This is especially valuable with the current team used for Acheron, which features two Nihility characters, both of which provide defense shred onto the enemy. Having a different source of boosting the final total damage Acheron dishes out would make this team meta and a lot easier for the average player to obtain. This will be around the time where Acheron would receive another 4-star light cone she could use that was a decent alternative to her 5-star light cone. There's two issues with this however. The fact that it's a gacha light cone, so you're dependent on RNG, and further amounts of RNG when it comes to copies. The second thing being that we discussed early in the video holds significant weight. Players that were saving for the rerun of Acheron are just going to most likely pull her light cone anyways. So in my honest opinion, this weapon should have been given to the player for free. Around this period of time would also be the release of Aventurine, whom is also a defensive option that works pretty well with Acheron. Aventurine is able to place a debuff onto the enemy via his ultimate, which gives Acheron more damage uptime with the ultimate stacks it gave. In situations where there is quite a bit of crowd control or you're not frequently breaking enemies, then Aventurine is really valuable with the added effect res he then gives to any ally that has a shield. So at this point, Acheron has received 3 upgrades to her performance, whether that was indirect or direct, which further reiterates what I said earlier in this video. This widens that gap between her and other damage dealers even further. So while Acheron hasn't received any planar set or relic set post-release, she will still remain the best damage dealer in the game. In my honest opinion, she's definitely a lot harder to build than most characters because of the amount of raw crit value she needs. But getting a newer set for both her planar and relics, even if it makes her slightly harder to build, would definitely allow her to widen that gap even further. 2.3 brought a very strong damage dealer that was on the same tier of Acheron. Now it's actually a great thing for Acheron, and I'll explain a little later. Firefly, much like Acheron, can be brought anywhere regardless of the enemy's weakness. This would automatically put her in the same tier as Acheron because it quite literally fundamentally changes the way you play the game. For better, of course. At this point in time, you were able to put Acheron on one side and Firefly on the other, which then gave you the most comfortable and easy clear of said content possible. It also worked in the favor of Acheron that Firefly wouldn't take any of her best supporters. I mean, we could say Gallagher is definitely one, but he worked even better with Firefly as a break character, so this one worked out in the end anyways. It also poses the chance for Hoyo to design another future character that functions the same exact way Gallagher does. This in turn would give you 2 Gallaghers, and be able to use the best damage dealer with their best teams that doesn't interfere with the team of another character. I did mention this being a good thing for Acheron, and the only thing I mentioned ended up being a bad thing, which was taking away the best defensive option that Acheron uses, of course from a free-to-play perspective. Let me just preface that for the average player, having another damage dealer on the same tier as Acheron means you can stop chasing future damage dealers to find one that also helps you comfortably clear the content as Acheron does. This is especially true when that character also does ignore the elemental weakness of the enemy, much like Acheron. This then allows you to fully commit on Acheron being the mainstay damage dealer on your account, and then gives you the option to either spend those future resources on the Light Cone or Eidolons. You can also just stockpile your resources for the future Fate collab, and that's also an option of course. I mean hey, with Hoyoverse announcing this a year in advance, you have more time to save up for whatever this may end up being. So earlier in the video, I mentioned that quite a few things the game received or implemented post Acheron was a net positive for the character. And while those were nice, the biggest performance boost would be with the release of Jiaoqiu in patch 2.4. The thing is about Jiaoqiu, his role is essentially an AoE version of Silver for the Acheron team. I mean, to be quite frank, he also does help the performance of Black Swan and the Acheron team as well, or even Kafka depending on the type of player you are. I mentioned earlier that with the amount of defense shred in the team present, will make the damage taken increase that Gallagher applied all the more valuable. The same could also be said for Jiaoqiu. So while Acheron's team is a hyper carry, this character then makes her team geared towards a more team damage oriented team that still plays as a hyper carry team for Acheron. While he doesn't seem like the most game changing character ever, he does make the best character even better, which for a lot of players, I'm sure is a net positive. This then widens the gap between Acheron and pre-Acheron characters even more, which I know for a lot of players is also a net negative. So we probably will be in an Acheron and Firefly meta for a very long time, which also means you can then comfortably save your premium currency until further notice. I mean, to be quite honest, you really don't need Jiaoqiu either, as he feels more luxurious than anything else at this point. Post Acheron has also been the easiest time for returning and newer players, well since ever. I mean, during the early days and launch of Star Rail, there was many damage dealers constantly releasing, and if we had the many game modes we currently have at the time of launch, there wouldn't be a clear standout character that makes every mode in the game a piece of cake like there is currently, which means that Star Rail post Acheron is a completely different game. If you made it all the way to the end, first of all, thank you. Second of all, I owe you a bit of an explanation. This is the first time I made a video like this where I haven't pulled the newest rate up character to buff, well, the entire purpose of the video character that I'm referring to here, in this case Acheron. Jiaoqiu isn't a bad character by any means, I just value Sparkle much more, which is pretty self-explanatory given my channel reputation at this point. But anyways, thank you for watching and have a nice rest of your day. Peace.